If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Granger understands that you go to great lengths, and sometimes heights, to ensure the power is always flowing. Which is why you can count on Granger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRANGER, click Granger.com, or just stop by. Granger, for the ones who get it done.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought, I gotta check that out. I mean, I'm getting older, sure, but I don't feel like I'm done with, the fun parts of life, like connection and desire, excitement. You don't really find those things at the grocery store or the doctor's office, so I went online. Date My Age made dating an adventure. It gave me a chance to feel like a teenager again. The thrill of seeing someone new and saying, wow. I could send a spicy gift, start a video chat, or just message my compliments to a beautiful woman.
Whether you love, or just like to look, the fun is waiting for you at Date My Age.
Sure, I was skeptical, but Date My Age is safe, secure, and fun.
Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought, I gotta check that out. I mean, I'm getting older, sure, but I don't feel like I'm done with, the fun parts of life, like connection and desire, excitement. You don't really find those things at the grocery store or the doctor's office, so I went online. Date My Age made dating an adventure. It gave me a chance to feel like a teenager again. The thrill of seeing someone new and saying, wow. I could send a spicy gift, start a video chat, or just message my compliments to a beautiful woman.
Whether you love, or just like to look, the fun is waiting for you at Date My Age.
Sure, I was skeptical, but Date My Age is safe, secure, and fun.
Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
In the late 70s, someone was stabbing homeless men to death in downtown LA, and doing it with the kind of confidence usually reserved for people who know no one's watching. The press called him the Skid Row Stabber. Police called in a guy named Bobby Joe Maxwell, who had the wrong vibes, a weird diary, and the bad luck of knowing someone who'd snitch for a sandwich. Today's story isn't just about a killer. It's about what happens when you need a name more than you need the truth. Before we dive in, if you like your true crime brief and bingeable, you're in the right place. Hit follow now for at least 2 new episodes every week. This is 10 Minute Murder. Let's get into it. (1978), downtown Los Angeles. The city's heartbeat was loud, but in the background, barely audible to the people not paying attention, something much darker had started to stir. In the alleys, beneath overpasses, and in forgotten corners of Skid Row, someone was preying on the people who had already been failed in every possible way. Most of them didn't have homes. If they were lucky, they had a blanket or a tarp. Maybe a shopping cart of things they called theirs. Many battled addiction. Many lived with untreated mental illness. And some were just people who'd been chewed up and spit out by life. Skid Row wasn't where you started. It was where you landed when every other door slammed shut. And then, people started dying. In October of '78, police found 50-year-old Jesse Martinez stabbed to death. No witnesses, no known enemies, no reason. Just dead. About a week later, 32-year-old Jose Cortez turned up dead. Same brutal ending. And not long after that, it was 46-year-old Bruce Drake. Something was happening, and the people it was happening to, society barely noticed. Weeks passed, and the bodies kept showing up. Most were left where no one would notice them until morning. Alleyways, behind dumpsters, tucked into forgotten folds of the city. But then came Frank Garcia. Frank wasn't left in the shadows. He was murdered in broad daylight near City Hall, right in the middle of downtown. People were everywhere, hundreds of them, yet somehow the killer managed to vanish into the crowd like smoke. The only thing left behind was a handprint. No name, no weapon, just proof that whatever this was didn't care about being seen. By the time the killings stopped in 1979, at least 11 people were dead. That's just the official count. There could have been more. Skid Row isn't exactly known for accurate record keeping when it comes to the homeless and the invisible. The press finally gave the killer a name, the Skid Row Stabber. But figuring out who he was, that was harder. A few people claimed they saw him, but their accounts didn't carry much weight. Not because they didn't care, but because they lived on the streets. And when you're homeless, even your eyewitness status comes with an asterisk. After the murder of a man named David Jones, 3 of his friends stepped forward. They said the man who killed him didn't just walk up and attack. He talked to them first, chatted for several minutes, said his name was Luther, described him as a 30-year-old black man with a Puerto Rican accent. This guy hung around like he was just another face in the crowd, until he pulled a knife and turned a conversation into a murder. 3 months after David Jones was murdered, a note turned up in a public toilet at the Los Angeles bus terminal, scrawled like a manifesto from someone who wanted credit for their crimes, but didn't want to actually face anyone. It read, "My name is Luther. I kill winos. I put them out of their misery." So now we had a name from witnesses and a weird toilet confession signed the same way. That was enough for police to start drawing a connection. But when they made their move, they didn't grab a guy named Luther. They zeroed in on someone else entirely. Enter Bobby Joe Maxwell. Bobby was 29, worked janitorial jobs when he could keep them, and had just relocated from Tennessee after a stint in prison. He'd moved in with his sisters in LA, and yes, he was known to hang out around Skid Row. Not to help people, just to lurk. His reputation wasn't great, and it wasn't improving. In December of '78, not long after the first few Skid Row killings, Bobby was arrested. Cops said they found him standing over a man who was sleeping on the sidewalk, holding a knife. Not a great look. They charged him with deviant behavior, which is doing a lot of vague, heavy lifting, and he spent a few weeks behind bars. And here's where it got messy. While Bobby was locked up, the killings stopped. When he got out, the final known murder happened. Add to that the handprint left at the Frank Garcia crime scene, it matched Bobby. So LAPD had a pattern, a print, and a guy with a sketchy background. That was enough. Bobby Joe Maxwell was arrested. Again, this time for murder. When the police searched Bobby's place, they found a knife, same size and same length as the one used in the murders. Not the knife, just a knife that looked similar. But that wasn't even the headline for detectives. What really got them buzzing was his diary. Inside, they found pages of ramblings that leaned heavily into satanic imagery. Dark, disturbing stuff, enough to make a prosecutor start connecting dots that weren't necessarily close together. To the LAPD, this diary looked like a motive on a silver platter. He wasn't just violent, they said. He was doing it for the devil. But the thing was, that was basically it. A knife that resembled the murder weapon and a diary that creeped people out. Nothing that actually placed him at the scene of the crimes. No eyewitnesses who weren't already deemed unreliable. No murder weapon, just a vibe. Then came the twist. Sidney Storch. Sidney had been Bobby's cellmate for 3 weeks. According to Sidney, Bobby spilled everything. He said he'd killed multiple homeless men as a sacrifice to Satan. Just told him flat out like they were sharing ghost stories before lights out. Bobby denied ever saying that, or anything remotely like it. But Sidney's testimony, plus those original witnesses who claimed to recognize Bobby from the night David Jones was murdered, That combo was all prosecutors needed. And just like that, Bobby Joe Maxwell's fate was basically sealed. In the end, Bobby Joe Maxwell's trial was a mixed bag of verdicts. He was acquitted of 3 murders, 5 more ended in mistrials, but 2 stuck. First-degree murder with special circumstances. That bumped him into death penalty territory. His life was now in the hands of a jury that had to pick between the gas chamber or life without parole. They chose life. The jury wasn't convinced enough to kill him, especially with the growing number of exonerations in death row cases. But the sentence matched the vibe of the entire case. A lot of uncertainty and even more what-ifs. Some folks believed Bobby was really the Skid Row stabber. Others looked at the evidence, or lack thereof, and started asking questions. Because here's the truth. There was no hard evidence tying Bobby's directly to the actual murders. No DNA. No fingerprints at multiple scenes, just that one partial handprint from City Hall. And Bobby was known to hang around there. As for the knife they found at his place, it was the right size, sure, but that's like saying someone with big shoes must be Bigfoot. The case rested entirely on witness testimony, and that started falling apart fast. The 3 men who'd originally ID'd Bobby as the guy who killed David Jones began backing away. One never got the chance. He was killed during the trial. The other 2 eventually admitted in 2010, more than 3 decades after Bobby's conviction, that they'd been pressured by investigators to lie, coerced into pointing the finger. And then there was Sidney Storch. Sidney wasn't just a jailhouse snitch. He was a professional jailhouse snitch. He had a reputation for reading about high-profile cases in the papers, then claiming his cellmate confessed. And surprise, he just happened to know all the details. He'd offer that confession in exchange for a reduced sentence, which is exactly what he did in Bobby's case. Bobby swore he never told Sidney anything, but that didn't matter. Sidney used the headlines as a script, fed it to the cops, and walked out of prison early because of it. The jury never heard that part. It took years for Sidney's full scam to come out. He helped wrongfully convict at least 6 people before dying in prison himself. By the time anyone could do something about it, the damage was already done. Eventually, with everything crumbling, an appellate court overturned Bobby's conviction and granted him a new trial. But life had one more punch to throw. Before that second chance could happen, Bobby had a massive heart attack. He fell into a coma and never woke up. His legal team kept fighting, kept hoping he'd come back around long enough to hear the good news. The charges were finally dropped. Bobby Joe Maxwell was legally a free man after spending more than 30 years behind bars. But he died without ever knowing he'd been exonerated. And we're still left with the same question that haunted Skid Row back in 1978. Who was the real Skid Row stabber? Thanks for listening to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and yeah, that one sat a little heavy. It's not hard to think about how many lives were upended, how many people got written off by a system that was more interested in closing a case than getting it right. And Bobby, he might have been the guy. He also might have just been the guy standing too close when the system needed somebody to blame. Either way, no one ever got real justice. Not the victims, not the families, and definitely not Bobby, who died in a coma while technically free. All right, before this spirals into a TED Talk on wrongful convictions and broken systems, let me remind you, if you liked this episode, make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening. That way, you won't miss the next story that will probably make you scream into your pillow. You can find me on social media at 10Minute Murder, and head over to 10minutemurder.com for more episodes, merch, place to drop me a line if you've got a story you want to hear. And speaking of that, I did an episode that wasn't like a planned episode this past weekend. It was called The Making of Ted Bundy, Secrets, Shame, and Silence. I've done episodes in the past on Ted Bundy, and the most interesting part of every serial killer case to me is what happened to make them who they became. Their whole backstories, their origin story. and the psychological/mental health aspect of it. That's the most interesting part in all of these stories to me. So I wrote a blog based on the research I'd done for previous Ted Bundy cases about just the beginning, just the early part of his life. And that's at 10minutemurder.com. And there are blogs that I'll write that never turn into episodes. So if you want to check some of that out, you can go do that. And this one, I just happened to have some free time and turned it into an episode that I released this last weekend. And here's an email about that. Hi, Joe. I found this episode fascinating. I'm intrigued by human psychology and what shapes people. I always ask, why would a person behave that way? I constantly research the backgrounds of people, from entertainers to politicians to murderers. My family says I'm the most curious person in the world. Therefore, this episode fed my curiosity. Could you make this a semi-regular part of your podcast? I don't want to overload you with work, but having an episode titled The Making Of, once a month or once a quarter, would be awesome. As a side note, I realize it is impossible to understand human motives completely. When it comes to evil, I believe that sometimes a small tear in a person's soul opens, allowing evil intentions to enter. And it just grows bigger and wider until the person is completely enveloped by evil. What once satisfied now requires increasingly evil actions to satisfy. Evil becomes addiction. Those are my dark thoughts this sunny Saturday morning. Now I'm off to enjoy a bright day and leave the darkness behind. Have a great weekend. Kelly, Omaha, Nebraska. First of all, thank you so much for the email, Kelly. And you and I are very much in a line on what is the interesting part of these stories, as I mentioned before reading your email. I can't tell you how many times during the day something will pop into my head and I'll just go research it. Like in the moment, I could be standing in line trying to pay for my groceries or something, and then something will pop in my head. I'm like, I've got to know the answer to that right now. And I'll, find myself down rabbit holes of researching this and that. And I have a feeling, Kelly, you're kind of that same way. But to answer your question, I would love to do the making of once a month or once a quarter, something like that. And I think I'm going to attempt that. There is a blog that I've written about Dennis Rader and before he became BTK. So that may be the next one I turn into an episode. Thank you for the email, and thank you for listening. And that's going to do it. That is 10 Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. We'll see you next time.